Okay, could everyone get seated, please? Okay, well, let's get started. So, I'm Steve Posios. I'm with the American Consumer Institute, and welcome everyone to the Consumer Advisory Committee meeting. Before we get started here, I want to just recognize a couple people in the room. We have Scott Marshall, our trusted and true contact here at the FCC.
One of them.
And also Christina Clearwater. She's the new Deputy Designated Federal Officer for the Communications Advisory, the Consumer Advisory Committee. So we're going to start off today's meeting with just introductions, and we'll go around the room. In addition to that, I have a sign-in sheet. If you could just, we'll start this way. If we could just check your name if you're in, and then after we go through the room, I'd like to just see if there's anyone else on the phone who is joining us as well. So with that, let me turn it over to Deborah.
Good morning. Am I on?
No,
Can't tell.
not yet, I hope.
Good morning? Yes?
No,
Camera's on? Voice?
no,
Here we
it's
go.
okay.
Action? Okay, we got it.
Yeah.
Good morning. I'm Debbie Berlin, representing the National Consumers League and Vice Chair.
Good morning as well. It's Barry Umansky with the Digital Policy Institute.
State Senator Eric Cook of Indiana, serving as a special government employee and subject matter expert.
Jonathan Howenchild from the American Legislative Exchange Council.
Olivia Wine, National Consumer Law Center.
TA.
Matt Gerst with CTIA.
Bodan Zachary, Milwaukee PBS.
Hi, Rachel Nemitz, CTA.
Michael Santorelli, serving individually, but but affiliated with the Advanced Communications Law and Policy Institute at New York Law School.
Thaddeus Johnson, Nasuka.
Vonda Long, AT&T.
Brian Young with the National Consumers League. Brian Hurley with ACA Connects.
Foley with the National Association of Broadcasters.
Shirley Brooker with
Call for action. Irene Leach, representing the Consumer Federation of America.
Johnny Camp is serving individually affiliated with the Taxpayers Protection Alliance.
Christina Clearwater.
Okay, and then of course Scott Marshall. So
I
let me.
was asleep on the switch.
It's all good. So is there anyone on the call who's joining us today?
Steve Kyle Hildebrand, serving as a special government employee.
Anyone else?
Hey, this is Katie McCullough, Digital Liberty and Americans for Tax Reform.
Okay. Last call. Anyone else online? Okay. So before we get started, too, I just wanted to recognize the National Broadcast Association for providing us with breakfast and lunch today. Very nice. Thank you. Also, just a point of etiquette, too. Now and then, we all want to get an opportunity to speak up. So just turn your cards up this direction so you can be recognized rather than just having a free-for-all. All right. So with that, I guess I'll turn your attention to the agenda. We have a lot of interesting things to do. We have some great presentations. And in fact, we have a recommendation as well that would be introduced towards the end of the day. So Please stick around. That's an important vote. And it also reflects a whole lot of hard work and commitment to sort of a dedicated effort, and so we definitely want to recognize that. So anyways, with that, I'd like to get started. I guess, do we have our initial speaker here today? Okay, so with that, let me turn it over to Jeffrey Prince. He's the FCC Chief Economist and Professor of Business Economics and Public Policy at the Kelley School of Business in Indiana University. Did you have slides, or you can just join us right up here? Yeah, let me just join you right there. So just an interesting fact, when we started the Institute, my co-founder was previously a professor in Indiana, and he happened to be chief economist at the FCC, and the wireline bureau chief was then the Common Carrier Bureau as well. So welcome aboard. I think Indiana's got a soft spot here at the FCC.
I think that's right. And I think it was only 5 years ago that David Waterman was the chief economist here, who is also, he's emeritus now at Indiana. But yeah, we have a long-standing tradition of involvement with the FCC. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. So I think maybe the best thing for me to do, just so you know kind of a little bit about me and my background, and how I might be of any use if you have anything you'd like to speak with me about, is I'm an economist by training, of course. I'm an empirical economist, so I do a lot of data work, predictive analytics, econometrics, applied to industry analysis. And I've done a lot on demand analysis, so I'm interested in things like internet demand issues, provision issues. So I've done a lot of work on digital divide in the past, and then demand for high technology products in the telecommunications space. So that's kind of where my research background overlaps a lot with some of the interests of the FCC. I've only been here, this is now the beginning of my 3rd week, so I don't want to pretend that I've got this all figured out yet. But I have been trying to talk around and get a sense for, what are the key issues that the Commission is focused on, and where might I be the most useful. As of right now, of course, this could change. As you all know, the kind of merger analysis has kind of moved past the FCC. So in some ways, this is good for me because it opens up a lot of kind of new opportunities rather than me coming in very late on that big task. So some of the things that have caught my attention, I know there's a big data collection effort underway by the Commission. It's kind of an overlap between what everyone knows as the 477, but then there's now kind of updated information they'd like to get moving forward that I think now has the acronym DODC, the Digital Opportunity Data Collection. So I can see myself getting involved with something like that. I know there's also the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, which is a big project going on. I can see myself getting involved with that. I think there's a lot of ongoing issues there. And then one other thing that got my attention, at least in the early stages, is potential kind of, I guess, acceleration of the white papers that the FCC produces. I think there is a real comparative advantage for me coming from academia. This is what I do, is research papers. And I think there's real interest at the Commission to try and produce more of these. And so I'd like to try and get that a little bit more formalized, kind of get the process in place, and really try and get involved with that during my year here to encourage some of the younger staff to produce some and build on the ideas that they've already put forth, and keep encouraging people to put out new ideas that might have general benefit. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. There's certainly many other projects that the Commission has going on. I'm sure I'll get involved a little bit with the C-band issues, things like that. But those are the ones where, at least as of right now, I'm in the process of getting involved, and could see myself having some long-term involvement in those, amongst others.
Okay. Do we have any questions, or? I do want to ask one thing
Sure.
in regard to, I know you do interested in a lot of the demand analysis and issues such as that. Any consideration of like doing like consumer welfare measurements and things of that sort as a sort of a test on how what's a test on a public policy or something?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's consumer welfare issues have certainly come into play in some of my work, and to the extent that would be relevant for policy analysis, I'd certainly be interested in doing that type of work.
Okay. Irene?
Yes.
I'm wondering whether you have access to any kind of consumer complaint data, and if there are any trends and so forth that you might be able to look at there, or if there's any way to get consumers to tell you things more often so that it could be more useful.
So, I mean, short answer is I haven't seen it yet. I haven't really gotten into the data yet, but I'd certainly be interested in that. I could certainly be on the lookout to see if that might be an opportunity for the Commission to be looking at those kind of data.
All right. Stephen?
So the Commission in the last year or so has created a whole bureau or office of economic analysis.
Yeah, raise your hand.
You're
Oh.
not on mic.
In the last year or so, the Commission created a whole office of economic analysis. Do you have a sense of how that changes the role of chief economist, or whether it has no effect? How you might work with them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, unfortunately, it's difficult for me to have ample perspective on kind of how it was before, other than just a little bit of hearsay from a few that have been here for a while. My sense is that there's a lot of enthusiasm about the restructuring. I think Jerry Ellig did a piece on this, basically looking at where would economics be more effective if you had economists distributed across the different bureaus, or if you had them concentrated as we do now. And it seemed that the conclusion was that they would be more effective in the current structure. I obviously can't empirically give you an answer to that, but I can say that I think it's actually made my life relatively easy to get started, because I kind of know who I need to be talking to, and I've already now met with a lot of people, and I kind of understand what my role is pretty quickly. So that's been a positive thing for me, and I'm ready to get my hands dirty and get moving on things. But obviously the first few weeks is kind of learning the lay of the land, and I think the structure actually has made that easier, at least from my perspective.
Okay. On the line, Steve, Katie, anyone have any questions? Anyone else in the room? Okay. Thank you, Jeffrey. I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Right. So moving ahead on the agenda then, we're going to get a briefing update from the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. Yeah.
No, at 9:25.
Yeah. Yeah, we're about 5 minutes early. Well, look, I mean, they're on the way down, so they're supposed to be here in 5 minutes. So if anyone wants to grab a cup of coffee or anything, let's just get right back real quick.
We're about 15 minutes early.
Yeah.
We're early.
We'd have to be at 9:25.
Okay. It was a quick briefing from the Economist.
Yeah.
Seems like a nice fellow.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, I think he's still trying to get the lay of the land.
Yeah. So, probably a good idea to look back.
Mm-hmm.
More to say.
Maybe
No, I didn't send you what you said. Okay, I'll do it now.
All right, thank you. I do have it. Doesn't really guarantee it.
No, I don't.
But a few years back, I noticed that Verizon had covered in this town, but if I travel to Texas, AT&T might be. So
They all have holes.
they all have holes. And I don't know how it's cut back on keeping things up. That's right. Okay, good. So, I guess we have that corner over there. Okay. Okay, so it's 9:25, so let's move on, everyone.
A little louder, show some authority.
Yeah. I'm going to check that if these are correct for you. Okay. All right, let's get started.
Morning.
All right, so now we're going to get an update from the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. And starting us off today will be Patrick Weber, the chief. Patrick?
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the fall meeting of the Consumer Advisory Committee. I know that this summer has been a very busy time for you on your critical call list, call blocking working group, under the leadership of Brian Young of the National Consumers League and Sam Brinton of the Trevor Project. Many hours were spent, and I know this firsthand from talking to Scott, many hours were spent developing a recommendation which the full committee will consider this morning. In June, the Commission asked for advice concerning how consumers should be notified when their calls are blocked. We also sought input on the types of numbers that should be included on a critical calls list. In addition, the Commission asked about how 911 numbers and government emergency numbers should be defined. The CAC's past work has been very helpful as we address the robocalls issue. And we look forward to hearing more from you on this subject. Thanks again for all your work on the recommendation before you today. I also look forward to the launch of the Caller ID Authentication Working Group, which will be coming up for our next meeting. They will develop a recommendation for your December meeting regarding consumer education surrounding the implementation of Shaken and Stir. Turning to your agenda today, Karen Schroeder from CGB's Consumer Policy Division will be back to talk to you about a robocalls blocking report that the Commission's June order directed the Commission staff to prepare. The Commission specifically cited the CAC's recommendation that urged us to study the effectiveness of call blocking services, methods, and technologies. Karen will talk to with you about how we plan to collect information for the first report that's due to the Commission in June of 2020. We will also have a second report due to the Commission in June of 2021. Later today, our Office of Legislative Affairs will provide a legislative update on robocalls and other consumer-related topics like safeguarding consumer privacy. Staff from the Wireline Competition Bureau will discuss recent work regarding the banning of malicious caller ID spoofing and foreign robocalls originating from overseas. You'll also hear about a new initiative, the Digital Opportunity Data Collection, which is a collaborative effort to provide more granular and accurate data regarding the availability of broadband services throughout the country. And finally, you will be briefed on the redesign of the Commission's Electronic Comment Filing System, or ECFS. The CAC's input was very helpful to us when we redesigned our online consumer complaint system and our Consumer Help Center. We hope you'll be able to provide us with your valuable counsel regarding the ECFS redesign as well. So that's it for me for now. Again, I appreciate all of your hard work, and I look forward to your recommendations. As is the usual custom here, CGB senior staff will provide you with a short update concerning their respective areas of responsibility. So we'll start that off with Mark Stone, who's a Deputy Bureau Chief. He oversees our Consumer Policy Division. So I'll turn it over to Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks.
Good morning. Nice to see all of you here for your second meeting. Since your last meeting in June, we've been very busy on robocalls policy and rulemaking. As you're very aware, the Commission, just after your last meeting, took strong action to fight illegal robocalls by allowing voice service providers to block certain calls on their customers' behalf by default. In other words, without their customers having to opt into blocking. But seeking to balance the consumer desire to stop illegal robocalls with the desire to not block good calls, the Commission sought comment on how it might protect important calls or critical calls aren't blocked. Now, we know you've been working hard on this issue to advise us, so we look forward to hearing your recommendation on that. In that same June action, the FCC directed the Consumer Bureau, in coordination with some other bureaus, to compile 2 reports on the state of robocall blocking tools, amongst other things. Karen Schroeder, as Patrick mentioned, will be here to talk to you a little bit about that today, and we look forward to getting your advice on that. Turning to another large robocalls project that I've mentioned before, the Reassigned Numbers Database. We continue our work on that project, being advised by another advisory committee, the North American Numbering Council. Once operational, that database, which the Commission established in December of 2018, will enable callers to identify numbers that have been reassigned before they make calls, so that they can determine the actual number the consumer they want to reach is at,
and avoid reaching consumers who have received the reassigned numbers but don't want to receive that call. So the Nancy is helping us work through technical and funding issues. We expect its recommendation in the next couple of months, at which point we'll seek comment on key issues and move towards a procurement for an administrator of that database. Finally, I want to mention one area of CGB that we don't always highlight, and that's our Reference Information Center. Through the RIC, as we call it, CGB serves as the Commission's official records custodian and hosts a lot of different important records. As part of that role, the RIC, in coordination with our Secretary's office and our IT folks, help manage the Electronic Comment Filing System, or ECFS. So we're glad our ECFS redevelopment team is here this morning to talk to you about getting your advice on upcoming improvements to this critical system. So with that, I'll turn it over to Barbara. Thanks again for all the help you do, all the help you give us in our work.
Thank you, Mark.
Oh, I got more than one. Good morning. And again, welcome to the second meeting. In June, I explained that I oversee the governmental affairs portfolio in CGB. And that involves the work of two different divisions, the Office of Native Affairs and Policy and the Intergovernmental Affairs Office. So I'm going to start with ONAP. And ONAP has been very busy throughout the summer. Together with other bureaus, it has continued the Commission's outreach to tribes and tribal organizations, holding additional tribal workshops in Norman, Oklahoma, Billings, Montana, and 2 additional workshops planned for the fall. The Commission uses these workshops to provide presentations on a broad range of important agency programs and policies that support deployment of communications infrastructure and services in tribal communities. Recent and upcoming events include a heavy emphasis on the recently created Rural Tribal Priority Window for new licenses in the educational broadband service portion of the 2.5 gigahertz band, which has the potential to significantly increase the deployment and adoption of modern communications services on underserved and unserved tribal lands. ONAP and the Wireline and Wireless Bureaus will also be making several presentations at the September 23rd to 24th National Tribal Broadband Summit, sponsored by the Departments of Education and the Interior and the Institute for Museum and Library Sciences. The chairman will be making a keynote address at this event as well, I believe on September 23rd. It's being hosted at the Department of Interior. If any of you are interested, you can sign up and attend. ONAP staff participated in and presented at multiple events held by external tribal organizations, including the National Tribal Telecom Association held a Tribal Engineering and Broadband Summit this spring in Mescalero, New Mexico. They attended the Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians Mid-Year Convention in Spokane, Washington. Also this summer, the Midwest Alliance of Sovereign Tribes Summer Conference in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, and the Native American Development Corporation Annual Convention in July. In terms of policy work, ONAP staff reviewed and made contributions to a variety of reports to Congress and federal rulemaking items, such as report on broadband deployment in Indian country, report on promoting broadband internet access service for veterans, spectrum partitioning, disaggregation, and leasing NPRM, educational broadband service report and order, connected care, pilot NPRM, Rural Digital Opportunity Fund NPRM, and the Digital Opportunity Data Collection Report and Order, and further notice of proposed rulemaking. ONAP also oversees the Native Nations Communications Task Force, which has been busy in completing its first report to the Commission on obstacles to deployment of broadband in Indian country. We expect the report to be finalized early this fall, and the group will meet again by telephone September 24th and in person here on November 5th to 6th. The Intergovernmental Affairs Office has also been busy, and they've attended or presented at multiple events held by state and local government organizations, including the National Association of Attorneys General Consumer Protection Spring Conference, National Association of Counties Annual, National Association of Regulatory Commissioners Summer Policy Summit, and the National Governors Association Summer Meeting. IGA, like ONAP, oversees an advisory committee, the Intergovernmental Advisory Committee. They met here in June. They're finishing up their term, which will end at the end of this month, and they're working on finalizing some outstanding tasks. And these will include a report on how to identify state, local, and tribal regulatory barriers to provision of telemedicine, recommend best practices to ensure that non-English speaking communities receive emergency alerts through multilingual alerting, recommend best practices for fine-tuning state, local, tribal coordination for disaster preparation, response, and restoration, and best practices for communications between state emergency managers and EAS state emergency communications committees to ensure that EAS procedures, including initiation and cancellation of actual alerts and tests, are mutually understood. So my people have been really busy. And, been a long summer. So, it's done.
All right.
Then I will turn it over to Diane Burstein.
Yeah, and she too is a deputy chief at, yeah, thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
So Diane is also deputy chief over at the Consumer Government Affairs Bureau. Diane?
Good morning. Thank you for having me back here today. I'm Diane Burstein, and in my role as Deputy Bureau Chief of CGB, I help to oversee the Disability Rights Office. And I'm happy to be here today to update you on some of the developments since I spoke with you last in June. And actually, it was early in June. Since then, there have been a number of different meetings that folks in the Disability Rights Office have attended as part of their outreach effort to various different consumer groups. And one of the meetings occurred in June after this meeting, where Chairman Pai announced the winners of the 2019 Chairman's Award for Advancement in Accessibility, also known as the Chairman's AAA. It celebrates outstanding private and public sector ventures as part of the Commission's continuing efforts to facilitate ongoing exchanges among the telecommunications industry, assistive technology companies and developers, government representatives, and consumers to share best practices and solutions for accessible communications technologies. The winners this year were Cisco for text-to-speech functionality in their 8800 series phones, and Microsoft, Tobii, and iTech, which developed a USB human interface device standard for eye trackers. So nominations for this upcoming period, 2020, will be announced, or the nomination period, so please stay tuned for that. As far as the accessibility of FCC programs go, in August, we announced or issued a public notice seeking comments on the FCC's programs and activities, the accessibility of our own programs and activities, which federal agencies are required to do. Federal agencies must make their programs and activities accessible to people with disabilities in order to comply with Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and the FCC has to review its own programs every 3 years. So there is an update now to its Section 504 handbook, which contains guidance on the provision of accommodations for the Commission's programs and activities, procedures for securing reasonable accommodations, and information about disability and accessibility. Comments on that are due October 21st. A number of other activities occurred in the emergency information area, as Barbara had mentioned, that the Disability Rights Office was involved in. On August 7th, FEMA had a nationwide EAS test conducted in conjunction with the FCC. DRO issued several reminders about the need to make that EAS test accessible to people with disabilities, and also encouraged the public to report back on any issues that might have arisen with that EAS test. So we're looking at that now. Also in August, the CGB issued a public notice reminding video programmers and distributors about the need to make emergency information accessible to people who are deaf or blind or visually impaired or hard of hearing. Emergency information is not the same thing as EAS. It's, in fact, it's important critical details about ongoing emergencies that may not trigger the EAS system. And that this issue took on significance with the arrival of Hurricane Dorian and various concerns about the large population living in its potential path. Some other areas that we were involved in this summer was working on issues related to hearing aid compatibility rules and some upcoming deadlines in that area. By September 3rd, wireless service providers must post on their websites expanded information about their handsets' hearing aid compatibility capabilities and retain certain records. And by October, wireless service providers must file their annual certifications of compliance with the FCC's hearing aid compatibility rules. Number of other items dealing with the telecommunications relay services came out this summer. On June 28th, CGB released an order establishing the per-minute compensation rates to be paid for all TRS for the period July 1, 2019 through June 30, 2020. The order also established the total size of the TRS fund for the year and the contribution factor. And in August, we issued a series of public notices seeking comment on a number of applications to provide Internet Protocol caption telephone service. Comments on those are upcoming as well. And the Deaf-Blind Equipment Distribution Program, in mid-June, CGB released a public notice that announced the allocation of funding for the National Deaf-Blind Equipment Program for the 2019-2020 fund year, and also, which provides $10 million for this program, by the way. And later, we released a public notice announcing the two new providers in Kentucky and Illinois where the existing participants had exited the program. There are some upcoming deadlines for video programming area as well. In June, the Media Bureau released a public notice inviting comment on Pluto TV's request for a temporary waiver of the rules requiring closed captioning of video programming on the internet on certain platforms. in which users can access Pluto TV's content. Those comments are due October 24th, and replies are due November 7th. CGB also released a public notice inviting public comment on a petition for declaratory ruling and rulemaking filed by a coalition of consumers and academic organizations regarding the quality of live captioning and the use of automatic speech recognition technology. And comments on those are due October 15th and replies October 30th. And finally, we have an upcoming meeting of the Disability Advisory Committee, which is September 24th. And the agenda for that will be, you can find that on the DAX webpage. Those are just a few of the highlights, and thanks for letting me address you this morning.
Thank you,
Next, I'll
Diane.
turn it over to Ed.
And now we have Ed Bartholomew. He's the Associate Chief at Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. Hey, Ed.
Good morning, everybody. Start off, I want to again thank you, just reiterate how much we appreciate the time that you share with us, the effort you put into the thoughtful recommendations that you pass. And I know that many of you have been active over the last 3 months and have put a lot of time into the recommendation that will be considered later today. So thank you for that. We did have a busy summer in outreach and education. On the outreach front, we conducted one of our FCC rural tours through the Midwest with stops in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and that was in later June. And I'm actually leaving with some colleagues this evening for our next rural tour, which is through Nebraska and Kansas, and we'll start tomorrow and run through Saturday. Hopefully in the future we can maybe talk about scheduling one of these meetings right at the end of a rural tour as opposed to like the day before we leave, so that we can tell you how great it went while it's fresh on our minds. But the timing's worked out that way for the last 2 CAC meetings. In June, we also fully launched our supermarket outreach program. So we've partnered with NAC, and in California and Las Vegas, we have done train-the-trainer events with some volunteers that staff what they call Hope booths. And if you think of a normal grocery store where there's a customer service kiosk, they've sort of ripped out that kiosk and filled it with volunteers with educational literature and consumer information. And we work with them to train volunteers so that they can answer questions about robocalls. We make our materials available in those booths in 4 of the most commonly spoken Asian and Pacific Island languages, as well as Spanish and English. And as Diane shared, we had a successful Chairman's AAA Awards event also in June. Another area of focus on the outreach front for us over the last few months has been enhancing our engagement with libraries. So in June, we displayed and spoke at the ALA conference, which was here in DC this year. We've done a series of webinars with reference librarians to cover important consumer topics like robocalls. We've also teed up and shared information with them about the broadcast transition, on the thought that, you know, if you can't find your TV station, you might pop in the library and say, hey, what happened to channel 3 or 4 or wherever? So they'll be ready to answer questions and help people navigate that situation. We did do some Lifeline Awareness Week messaging in September, and we are actually working more closely with USAC to develop some educational materials on the National Verifier as it rolls out to more states. And thank you to Olivia for teeing up that relationship there. We appreciate that. On the education front, actually, one more thing on outreach. We did start earlier this month a series of monthly partner outreach calls. So it's basically an open phone bridge. Outreach staff is sending out an email to everyone on our outreach list. If you're not getting them, let us know. We're happy to add you. We're going to cover a different consumer topic each month and share some other updates. So this past month, we talked about communicating during an emergency, which was very timely given things that were happening, and then talked about the upcoming rural tour and things along those lines. Exciting education project that we launched over the summer is our scam glossary. So if you go to the Consumer Help Center, you can find a link to the scam glossary, and it is an alphabetical catalog of some of the more common phone scams. If anyone has a scam that starts with Q or Z, I would love to talk to you. We do still have a few letters missing. Maybe we can run some sort of contest, although I think scammers might pick up on that and get the wrong intonation there. So we've got what we think is a pretty good catalog of stuff. If you find stuff that you think's missing, please reach out and let us know. And all of those are sort of short blurbs, and they link to other more detailed content, most of which is on our site. Some of it's on our colleagues at the FTC's site. And I want to acknowledge our stellar summer intern, Gus Meny, who was the project lead on that and helped us get that out the door. So thanks, Gus. We also launched a new series of Consumer Help Center posts that detail a scam, break it down, and include actual scam audio. So we're really happy that we're able to now let consumers not only read through and understand the scam, but listen to the scam, so they can hear how that call will start. Following after the June workshop that I think Barbara mentioned, where IGA and Public Safety talked about emergency alerting, we really ramped up our language efforts around our emergency communication tips. So they are now available in English, Spanish, Chinese, Korean, Tagalog, Vietnamese, and French. And those are all audio 30-second and 60-second PSAs. They've all been uploaded to NAB's PSA site. And we also proactively have started reaching out to state broadcasters that are potentially in the path of a storm to remind them that these exist, to tell them where they can find them, and they can grab those and play the languages that are most relevant in their community. Even if it's an English language broadcaster, they may find use for playing Spanish or some of the other languages based on the situation. And I also want to acknowledge the efforts and partnership with our colleagues in DRO, because in addition to all of those languages and audio, we have an ASL video that shares those communication tips as well. So that community can benefit from that information also. And today, we are launching a consumer guide on phone port-out scams. This has been a very heavily covered in the news media over the summer. This is where people go into a cell phone service provider, basically convince them that there's someone else, and then get their phone number transferred to a device in their possession. This really plays on the rise and the importance of two-factor authentications for access to financial accounts, social media accounts. There have been a number of stories where people have lost significant amount of money as a result of this. So we've put out some consumer education to keep people on top of port-out scam. So we're educating people on how they can protect themselves. Another interesting thing that we've started to do over the summer is expand our printed materials to now include versions in Hmong. So that's another language where we've got some of our most popular scam guides that people can now order, and we'll have at events as we travel. Since we met in June, I've also started to be more involved with our Consumer Complaints and Inquiries Division. I think I got that backwards. It's Consumer Inquiries and Complaints Division. But they are the people that staff the call center. So when you call 888-CALL-FCC, that's who you're talking to. They also take the online complaint forms that people submit through the fcc.gov/complaints. They are continuing to streamline internal processes. As you all know, many of you have been on the CAC for a while. You've been instrumental in helping this CICD staff to think through changes, tweaks, improvements. We welcome that continued engagement, that continued interaction. If you have ideas, if you have concerns, if you're hearing about things that you don't think we're covering from an education standpoint, or that you think the Complaint Center might be hearing about, reach out, let's have a conversation, and let's make sure that that's on our radar as well. Stay in touch. If you're not already in touch, please reach out and get in touch. I know most everyone at the table, and I've enjoyed working with you, and I hope we can continue to do so. If you have events that we can support or participate in, let us know, and if you have ideas about future education topics, please let us know. So thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Ed. Yeah, we're going to get questions at the end, but if you have a quick one, okay.
He's going to stay.
Yeah. Well, so let's turn it over now to Zach Champ. He's the Chief of Staff.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Zach Champ. Oh, I've got a placard. Nice. So you may not have met me in this capacity, but I'm relatively new to the FCC, started this spring. I want to thank you all on the CAC for your time and effort and expertise. A little bit about my role, just look at me as another point of entry to the Bureau. We heard great things from all of my colleagues about all the work they're doing. If you're a little confused where to go, who to reach out to, please see me as a resource for that. I'll make sure that you find the right folks if you're looking for meetings, those sorts of things in the Bureau, or if you have other questions about the FCC as a whole. Beyond that, I just wanted to introduce myself. Thank you again for the work you're doing. Look at me as a resource again. And as was mentioned, we are available for questions. If you all have those, we're around. We can take those now as well.
Okay. So, yeah, actually, so now we have 6 speakers. So if you have questions on anything that's been presented here, we have the experts in the room. We can bring them forward. So, all right. Well, go ahead, Deborah.
I have a question for Ed. Calling Ed. So Ed, I'm interested in the rural tour and just wanted to know what you're doing on the rural tour. And, maybe you can just tell us a little bit more about, I know your next one that you've got, but maybe you can just tell us a little bit about what you did on the previous rural tour.
So it does involve a lot of driving. That might not surprise you. We were able to identify a GPS inaccuracy when we were in Georgia earlier this year. That led us to a brick wall. And we were like, I don't know that that's a good route to take. So lots of things. But mainly what we try to do is reach out to and work with partner organizations to establish local events where we invite the community to come in. We talk to them about pocketbook issues. As it might not surprise anyone, robocalls are a concern for people. So we hear about robocalls, and then we share with them ways they can protect themselves, things they can do, things that the FCC is doing to help protect them. On the upcoming tour that we're leaving on later today, we have some great partner-coordinated events. I don't think AARP is here this morning, probably because they're working hard to make sure this partner event we're doing with them is a success later this week. But we're doing an event with them on Wednesday that'll also involve the Nebraska Attorney General's office, people from the Nebraska Public Service Commission, and then on Saturday, we're doing an event with the Kansas Attorney General in Leavenworth, Kansas. So things like that where we invite the community in. We do drop-offs at libraries, so that's another reason why we work. One of the things I did this summer was go to the Association of Rural and Small Libraries to learn more about how we can leverage those partnerships and work with them to create events. It's a lot of interacting with not only consumers, but also local elected officials. So hearing from the sort of local county-run water company about how scam phone calls are impacting them and their customers. And then we bring all that back, share it with Mark and the policy team and others here in the building to try to inform the things that we do moving forward.
Thank you.
So, Ed, can you just follow up on that? So, robocalls, of course, is the one issue, but what are some of the other issues that are being raised and that you see as sort of an area for more education and outreach?
Sure. So one of the things that we're definitely planning on covering on this upcoming tour is the port out scam information. So that's a new thing for us to get some education out there about, and I think it's also, for the small group of people that it is happening to, it can be incredibly impactful. So we want to make sure that people have tips on how to protect themselves from things like that. We're going to cover other things about protecting your smartphone device, the FCC rules on slamming and cramming, and what you can do if you think you've been a victim of that. We talk about the importance of closing the digital divide, and a host of other really pocketbook issues that affect people day to day. And sometimes it's one of those things where, and many of you do this, but you get in a room and you've got a plan, and suddenly the crowd takes everything in a totally different direction, and you're talking about the things that they're focused on and that they care about.
Yeah. So I'm going to go to Irene, but just to kind of go back on that, you mentioned in your earlier presentation that consumers have suffered losses as a result of the sporting scam. But if the carrier actually is responsible for giving that call away to someone else, who really should be liable for that? I mean, is it?
So I'm not going to weigh in on liability. There are some, the non-lawyer of the bench gets asked the liability question. There are some active things going on out there around that, and you can look into some articles that have covered that.
Okay, so let me turn it over to Irene Leach.
Ed, as you all are doing your traveling, do you have any things set up with the cooperative extension system and with any of the local extension offices? Because there should be one in every county you're visiting.
So we've worked with some of the co-op providers, but I don't think we've worked with, and I realize there's a distinction there, I don't think we've worked with co-op extension offices, and that's a great flag for us as we're especially route planning and sort of just reaching out to get a sense of where we're going to be, and then also working with them to have events. So I thank you for that suggestion, and we'll definitely take that back.
Because they can help you with finding locations for meetings as well as connecting, because people in the community know them. And so as you're coming in, I would think that would be a really good resource to look at. And I wondered that audio of the scam, how are you letting educators who might be working with the public know that that's out there, and are there ways that you're being sure that consumers can access that, especially those who may not use the internet?
So I'll ask for help on getting the word out. So they do exist. We started them late August and the first week of September. We did 2 posts. One focuses on a Medicare scam and what those sound like. And then Patrick actually did a blog post on some personal calls that came to his cell phone that were sort of two different variants of a callback scam. So those are out there. We're adding more. We got some SSA call audio that we're going to add to an existing SSA post that we did earlier this year. So please help us spread the word. We're working with the Office of Media Relations to do social around this and to get the word out. News coverage would also be helpful, and that's something that we're coordinating with them to sort of push for a little more around these. But we would welcome your support in getting the word out as well.
Okay, Ed, we're going to keep you in the chair for a little bit. Shirley, you have a question?
Yes, I'm sorry. Ed, tell me, is there really life after call for action?
No, absolutely not.
Anyway, it's nice to see you here and an excellent presentation. But what I wanted to ask you about is if we can play at Call for Action some part in helping you to get the message out through our media offices, since we do have in Kansas, and where else are you going to, Wisconsin?
In Nebraska on this one.
Oh,
We did
Nebraska on
Wisconsin
this
before,
one. Yeah.
and I did reach out to Colin and other folks in
Great,
Wisconsin when we were
great.
going through there. But yes, I would welcome the help, and we should be coordinating with you.
We would be more than happy to offer any help that we can. So anyway, and thank you for an
Thank you.
excellent presentation.
Thank you, Shirley.
Yeah. no,
Deborah?
This is repeating the same message, but I was just going to say, Ed, that any organization that has access to a membership should probably send out that word that this is available, because I think it would be really great information. So.
Yeah, and another project we did over the summer was our outreach team did sort of aggregate all of our outreach contacts into a centralized database. So we are going to be working on how do we leverage that better, how do we get things out through that network to better help promote and to better help plan activities and events.
Yeah, so anything we can do to help.
Thank you.
All right, we have another question.
This is for anyone in relation to, in CGB, in relation to your consumer complaints, inquiries and complaints database. Is there some consideration about tracking? So say the same person is filing complaints, but it could be over several years, a couple years or whatever, to track that person and the outcome of the situation, because it could be within a different department within the Bureau. So I'm looking to see tracking and the outcome and how that's counted. That would be very helpful to those of us who are served with complaints.
And we do internal tracking on things like that, obviously. So, you know, if somebody submits a second complaint, they're able to tie that back to that same individual from previous complaints they've reported. But because of the sort of rules around PII and things like that, that's not something that we would, as it pertains to an individual, would be able to make public. But it is something that's done internally to ensure that we're meeting needs and covering issues as appropriate.
Okay. Another question?
All right, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Ed, for your presentation. Consumers often look to their state legislators for help on these issues, even though that's not really within the scope of what we do. To what extent have you been able to reach out to state legislators across the country through our organizations and let them know that you're there, let them know, their staffs in particular, that these resources are there, or if not, how can we help?
Sure. I think I would invite the how can we help. We have had some success with that. In Nebraska, we were able to work with a state legislature who had pushed some robocall-related legislation through the Nebraska state process, and we would welcome that opportunity in other places. We also do work pretty well with the Public Service and Public Utility Commissions, which is our normal sort of touch point for referrals and things like that at the state level.
And thanks, Ed. And just to follow up, not so much legislation, but educating our staff on the consumer protection resources that are out there.
Sure,
So
sure.
we can make sure we get consumers to the right place for this information.
Right, and I don't want to create the impression that we're working with state legislators on legislation. My way of using that example was that we were able to identify this individual because of their heavy involvement on a robocall-related bill. So that was a sort of a, hey, reach out to this person, let them know we're coming to town, there's going to be an event, and then they can help work with us to do consumer education. But yes, definitely, to the extent that we should have a conversation about how that would make sense to do that. Sure.
Okay, well, thank you, Eric. So since we have Ed on the seat right now, let me just check the phone lines to see if there's any questions. Anybody out there have a question for Ed at this time? Okay, just a little bit of education for me. What exactly is the AAA Awards event? I heard that mentioned, and I wasn't sure what that was.
So this is probably where, yeah, you want to take this one?
Okay.
Diane?
All right, Diane Burstein.
Hi, thanks. It's an annual event, and it's been going on for a couple of years now, where various different providers of accessible equipment or services might apply and get recognized by the commission for their work in this area.
Okay. Was there anything like notable and like new initiatives, or are these like equipment manufacturers and service providers, or?
Well, this year, Cisco was one where they had introduced an enterprise phone that was accessible to blind people, I believe was the advancement there. And then eye tracking technology, which was a group of people who also had submitted applications in that area.
Okay, that's very helpful.
Yeah,
so
it's great stuff.
yeah, absolutely. So we have 6 presentations. Were there other questions that people had of the earlier presenters? Anything else? Anyone online have a question? Steve or Katie?
Nope.
Can I just
Okay.
say something?
Yes.
I just want to thank the Bureau for giving us so much time today and for the leadership you provide for consumers. So thank you so much. Thank you all. Great staff.
All right, so we're back to a break time. So yeah, so we'll be back at 10:30, but come back early in case we start early, because we have a little bit of time here. So we'll see you then.
I can understand everything. I would always be afraid to
Okay, well, let's get started here in just a couple seconds. Everyone take a seat. So, first, let me just start with a couple administrative things. Does anyone need cups for water? I just wanted to make sure we have some bottles coming shortly. Also, just a reminder, in addition to raising your tent card, if you have a question, when you begin, please announce your name and organization. It's sometimes helpful because we are keeping a transcript just so we can follow what's happening there. Also, just another administrative item. If for some reason you don't have an agenda, it's on the back table. If you want extra copies, you might also find some of the presentation PowerPoints back there as well. So if you want to grab that real quick. Also, I just want to stop as we start here. Just to stop for a second now. I just want to thank Catherine Langston, who's been doing a lot of the planning to make things go smoothly, the logistics, the food arrangements, and things such as that. So, Catherine, thank you very much for doing that. So,
I'd like to thank Christina and Scott for being really helpful.
okay, it's great. So let's start off now. So. What we're going to get a presentation here on the ban of malicious caller ID spoofing and foreign robocalls. This will be a very good presentation brought to you by Pam Arlick. She's the Chief Competition Policy Division. So Pam, it's over to you.
Great. Hi. It's working. Can everyone hear me? Great. Okay. Thank you. So thanks, everyone. Do I need to do anything with this, or is it
Click it for it to
click it with
advance it.
Oh, okay. So just all right.
There you go.
Great. Okay. Oh, fantastic. So I'm new at this. So as everyone knows, robocalling has been just a huge issue at the commission and for everyone. I think it's one that everyone can relate to. And, American consumers, we continue to be plagued by nefarious schemes that manipulate caller identification information to deceive people about the name and phone number of the party that is calling in order to facilitate fraudulent and harmful activities. In just the first 6 months of 2019, the Commission received over 35,000 consumer complaints about caller ID spoofing. It's the #1 complaint that the FCC gets. So on August 5th, 2019, the Commission released the second report and order that revised the Commission's. Oh, great. Oh, thank you. Oh, much better. Thank you. That revised the Commission's Truth in Caller Identification rules to implement the amendments to Section 227E of the Communications Act, which was adopted by Congress last year as part of the Ray Bombs Act. The main thing, the second report and order that we adopted in August, it's actually a pretty narrow order. It implements the amended Section 227E, and it continues the Commission's multi-pronged approach to protecting American consumers from illegally spoofed robocalls. The main thing that the order does is it revised the caller ID spoofing rules to cover communications that originate outside the United States directed at recipients within the United States. So those communications are now banned by the Truth in Caller ID rules. And then the Commission expanded the scope of communications covered by the Truth in Caller ID rules beyond the telecommunications services and interconnected VoIP services to include text messaging and alternative voice services such as one-way VoIP services. And so in doing that, the commission revised, one of the big things the commission did was revise the definition of text message. And in doing so, the commission adopted a definition that pretty much mirrors the statutory language of Section 227E. The commission also clarifies that the definition of text messaging includes messages sent to or from a person or entity using common short codes. Short codes are 5 or 6 digit codes typically used by enterprises for communicating with consumers at high volume. The commission also incorporated the exclusions from the definition of text message from Section 227E, which include a real-time two-way voice or video communications and a message sent over an IP-enabled messaging service to another user of the same messaging service, except for an SMS or MMS message. The commission also modified the definition of voice services, which was consistent with the new statutory language. So for the purposes of the new Truth and Caller ID rules, the commission interpreted the term voice service to be more expansive and to include one-way VoIP services and any similar IP-based or other technology-based calling capability that furnishes voice communications to an end user using resources from the North American Numbering Plan or any successor to the North American Numbering Plan adopted by the Commission under Section 251E1. So that is pretty much what we did in August. If anyone has any questions, I am happy to answer.
Okay, let's open it up then for questions. Anyone? Anyone on the phone? So, I think that did it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Pam.
Great. Thank you.
All right. So, do we have Karen Schroeder here?
She's not here yet. I will.
Okay.
Do you want me to go ahead?
Would you call her?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Soon? Oh, yes.
So very, very brief.
Yeah. All right, so let's just take 2 minutes if anyone wants to just
Yeah.
stretch or refill, and
Table break.
we'll be right back.
Table break.
It's always hard to estimate how many questions.
Oh, for sure.
on any
Sure.
particular-
Shirley?
Yeah, Shirley, I don't think your mic's on yet. Your mic's not on yet. Raise your hand.
Raise your hand.
These are wonderful words. You need to hear them. Good Lord.
Now you're booming.
There you go. Okay. I just had gotten an email the other day, and it had to do with where the calls are going, what carriers are being used. And it turns out that this survey by the Transaction Network Services, I don't know who they are, it's just something that I had gotten and some information.
I know who they are.
Anyway, they said that we're now receiving 200 million calls a day, consumers, a day. Now, but the point I wanted to make was, of the 6 major carriers, their survey says that the 6 major carriers provide 70% of the service, but only 12% of these fraudulent calls are going through these major carriers. So they're hitting the smaller carriers in other parts of the country, where you may also have a more vulnerable population. I just thought that was very interesting. If anybody wants, I can send them a link to the article. Does that startle anybody? It startled me.
Yeah, I'm not sure that even when a lot of the robo-blocking rules take effect, that
Yeah.
much of that will change, because a lot of those are still on old POTS networks and
Right.
not
Right.
IP.
That's the point the article's making, is how much can we do because the smaller carriers are
Right.
probably not going to have the resources to
Yeah.
put in place all the sophisticated technology
Well,
to
send the
block
article
these.
around. Transactions Network Services is a major.
Are they a major player?
network. It's a major network of like credit card transactions.
Okay.
So that
I thought
don't
it
know
was.
what else
I
they
thought
do, but,
the
yeah.
study the survey was fascinating.
Yeah, that would be helpful to see that.
You
Yeah.
want to see it?
Yeah,
I'll
send
send
it-
it to
send-
you,
Send it
Steve.
to Scott.
I'll send it to Scott. We send everything to Scott.
Okay.
Okay, I'll send you the link to it, Scott.
Easy, okay.
Okay.
Great. Well, I'll be sure everybody gets it.
Okay. Okay. So with that, let's keep on. We'll just move ahead here. So we're going to hear now from Karen Schroeder. We're going to hear a report on the deployment and implementation of call blocking and caller ID authentication. So this is the next big issue here for our working group. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, sit right next to me.
Thank you.
So,
And there's a little
can we get some assistance maybe on the slide deck? I don't.
And the next file
Do you
should
have a
be
slide deck?
yours.
Does she have a deck?
Okay.
It should be preloaded in the machine.
She does.
If you need
She has
help,
slides.
one of the AV guys can.
Yeah, just 1 second as we get this established.
Okay. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Scott, did you get my email?
Regarding your event? Which one?
the one I
The article?
He probably hasn't checked.
No, I haven't
study,
checked.
yeah.
No, I
Okay.
can check the phone.
It's going to take a moment. We can do it without the slides projected, and you can just listen to me instead of following along.
Is someone back in our AV board there could help, Steve or Jeff or Greg?
Yeah, we need help with the slide deck.
Maybe they could help with the deck, because that should work simply. You shouldn't have to struggle with it. So
All right, they put the spotlight on me.
sorry, Karen.
No, it's all right. I've dealt with things like, oh, something's happening.
Nope, that's the same one.
So it's the presentation entitled Call Blocking Report, if anyone back there hears me. Looks like this.
Can they all read? Usually they, there's someone
right.
back there. What do you want to go ahead?
There are a few copies on the back table. Here we go.
Here we go. Here comes Jeff.
Oh, good.
Hey, Jeff,
Hi.
the man of the hour.
Oh, is it just on this laptop? Oh, I could have done that. Sorry, I thought you had to do something in the back.
Thank you. What's the?
Something
Title?
about call blocking report. Karen Schroeder.
It's one of the ones, yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I
It's got
could
her
have done
name
that.
on it. That's all right. There you go.
Thank you very much.
And now the much awaited report.
Right. Sorry.
Good morning. Sorry for the confusion. I'm an attorney in the Consumer Policy Division in CGB, and I'm here to talk about a call blocking report that I think we're going to be asking you for some help with, which makes sense because it was originally your idea.
Get what you hope for.
That's right. So CGB has been working on the first of two planned staff reports on call blocking. In June of this year, the Commission directed us to prepare these two reports in consultation with WCB, Wireline Competition Bureau, and with Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. And the purpose of the report is to study the implementation and effectiveness of blocking measures. And as I said, the report is based in part on the CAC's recommendation regarding unwanted call blocking from September of 2017. So the report, sorry.
Okay, so the report covers several topics, and in red are the two that we think you might be able to help us with. The first of those is availability of call blocking solutions, and the second is effectiveness of call blocking solutions. The report also covers the impact of FCC actions, the deployment and impact of Shake and Stir, the impact on 911 and public safety, and anything else, any other information that may inform the Commission's analysis of the state of deployment of advanced methods and tools to eliminate illegal and unwanted calls. So we expect that we'll be working with you on a formal request for those two in red, but one of the things I was hoping to talk to you about today is I'm going to go through each of these and get you started on thinking about what you might have to offer on any of them, with an emphasis on the first two. So, availability of call blocking solutions. We're wondering if the CAC has any data or other information on the availability of call blocking solutions offered to consumers. What solutions are available? Are they opt-in? Are they opt-out? Are they network level? Are they third-party? Fees that are charged for the solutions. How many consumers are subscribing, either in terms of a proportion or a number. So just general information on call blocking solutions that are out there. And then the effectiveness of those solutions. Wondering if the CAC has data or anything on the volume of robocalls transiting our phone system, how that number might be determined. We get different estimates of that from different sources. How effective the solutions are at blocking illegal and unwanted calls. Does the solution send an intercept message for blocked calls? If so, how many does it send? What's the rate of false positives? What's the rate of false negatives? How many calls does the solution block? Then the other areas that you may or may not have information on is the impact of the FCC actions that we've taken to date. Back in November of 2017, we issued the call blocking order, which allows the voice service providers to block calls in certain specific instances, namely do not originate calls, where the originator of the call has said, I only use this number to receive calls, I never send outbound calls. Also blocking invalid, unallocated, or unused numbers that can't be making calls. We've also issued a declaratory ruling back in June in the same item that produced the request to do this report, that lets voice service providers default people into call blocking solutions so that people can opt out of them rather than having to proactively opt into them. So we're wondering, how effective were these measures? What's being done in response to them? How is that going? Another topic is the deployment and impact of Shake and Stir. We have an open rulemaking on this. We did an NPRM so that suggesting that if the major voice service providers haven't implemented by the end of this year, we're positioned to require it. We know industry has made progress on Shake and Stir, and we're curious for an update on the progress made. And then very important impact on 911 services and public safety. We definitely want to make sure that any call blocking does not block calls to or from emergency numbers. That's a critical area of public safety. So we wanted to know if there's any information on whether calls are being blocked in error, and then how that blocking is reported and resolved, hopefully quickly. Hopefully not at all, if it's at all quickly. And then what's happening with public safety entities? Are they experiencing unwanted or illegal calls coming in that are interfering with their mission? And then finally, other. If you have anything that I haven't already asked for that may inform our analysis on this topic, we would, of course, welcome it. So we're going to be issuing a public notice to seek input on this. We're also probably going to be asking you for your help, as I've mentioned. We recognize that some of what we're asking for is competitively sensitive. So if anyone wants to aggregate information so it's not attributed to specific organizations, we welcome aggregated information, if that's the way we can get it. And we're looking for both current data and projected data through July 2020, if it's available. Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, so let's open it up. Do we have any questions in the room? Shirley?
Here I am. I'm supposed to be on that group, and truthfully, I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm thinking, I don't have a clue where to start. Does anybody else who's going to be on this call authenticate, can't even say it, feel the way I do as to how do we even start on something like this? I mean, to me, the questions that you ask are the essential ones, but where does the data come from? Where does the information come from? How do you accumulate it? Those things come to my mind when I'm sitting here listening and thinking, these are the things that we need to know, but how in the world do we get it?
Yeah, Karen, do you have thoughts on that?
I have a few thoughts. I confess I had the same thought when I was tasked with it.
Thank you.
We need to, I recognize that some of this data is difficult. For example, the volume of robocalls across the network. We just did a quick internal analysis, and you get numbers on that are orders of magnitude different depending on what exactly you call a robocall, what network you're looking at. That you're going to get data from different perspectives that's going to differ. So I think what we're probably going to have to do with this report is gather the data that we can find, recognizing that we're probably not going to have a definitive answer for every question. What we can do is we can say that this industry group estimates this, and this industry group estimates this. I'm hoping that the public notice will give us a good range of organizations responding with those different perspectives, and then we can give ranges and we can give those different perspectives in the report.
Shirley?
Did you hear by any chance, were you in the room when I was mentioning earlier about a survey by the Transaction Network Services, that they found that consumers are receiving about 200 million robocalls a day, and that of those, only 12% of them come from the top 6 carriers, through the top 6 carriers. They were saying that the majority of them come through the smaller carriers. Now, I'm not that familiar with what that actually means, but to my mind, it says it's going to be awfully hard to get real information. I sent Scott a link to the article that I'm referring to, the survey, and Steve says that this company is a known player, so that we can put some validity. Steve, would you say that to what they're saying?
Well, yeah, they're a main player in,
Okay.
in credit card transactions.
Okay.
For like point of sales and things like that. So they have their own, they have a network, but I don't know the
Well, we don't know. We
methodology
don't
of
know
the survey, but,
right.
yeah.
We don't know exactly how they came to all these figures, but it was certainly startling to me when I saw it, and that's why I wanted to bring it to everyone's attention today. I've shared this with Scott, and I'm sure he can share it with you, Karen, just to take a look at it and see what you think about it.
I'm familiar with TNS in the report. I'm trying to remember how they define robocall, because that's one of the, not all robocalls are bad.
Right.
If you get account balance reminders, appointment
Let me
reminders.
see if they say that.
Things like that, those, some organizations consider those to be robocalls, others do not include wanted calls in their data. So that's part of that discrepancy in the numbers I was telling you about.
They say unwanted robocalls. Now, I don't know how they define that.
That's a difficult
Well, actually,
one to
they talk about
define.
scam and fraud robocalls.
So scam and fraud can be more narrow, but again, that is one of the issues that we've been having with the data is exactly.
I understand.
What are you measuring?
Sure.
Which is, I can't speak for the commission's final determination on this report, but in the past, what we've done is give a range, give the different data points that we get, what we know about what they're measuring, and that sheds some light on the situation. So I think there's value in pursuing this, even if we don't get the answer. I understand your concern with how do you provide that information.
I'm quite interested in how we approach this.
Okay. Did we have other questions? Okay. So, and also, is there anyone on the phone who has a question? So, with that, Karen, thank you so much.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So, Kirk here? Or? Okay.
I don't know. 10:55, so.
Yeah. So we're running early again.
They may not be in here yet.
All right. So we're.
They're not here yet.
Yeah.
I'll email them.
Okay, so, while we do that, what I was saying is they're one of the major players that do the transactions for credit card verification. And so I'd be interested in looking at the methodology to see the extent that maybe the fraudulent calls are actually going, trying to make, credit sales and things such as that. But,
I don't know. I haven't read it that much. I just saw it the other day, and I thought, gosh, in view of what we're going to be talking about here, it'd be very interesting to know what they're saying. So I just read it.
Yeah.
And so anyway, Scott can share it with everyone.
So
And
Steve,
whether or not you want to read it, that's up to you.
Go ahead, Debbie.
yeah, Debbie?
No.
so I assume the questions.
You're not on.
I'm not on. I think I'm on now. I assume the questions that the working group will need to address will be provided to them. Some of the issues the questions that she brought up will be provided in a very specific way for the working group, so that
Right.
they'll have that direction.
Scott?
Yes, am I on here? Am I on? Chat. Oh, okay. Here we go. Yes, we will, the report topic is not currently a working group, but will likely become one. And we are working on providing some specifics on what the CAC could provide, realizing that it may be a question of leveraging information that our members or that some members around the table here have, that we being CAC, don't have any independent research capability. So this afternoon at 1:30, there's going to be a group down the hall here in 402, 445. Anybody that wants to talk about this, kick it around a little bit, you're welcome to do that. The caller ID authentication group has been already established. Many of you are on it, and that's a sort of a different topic than what we're talking about in the report arena, because what the caller ID group has been charged to do, and there's specific language in your packet of what that charge is and the questions being asked, is to look at what kind of consumer education challenges or strategies surround educating consumers about the implementation of Shake and Stir. When they see the Shake and Stir symbol on the telephone screen, what does it mean exactly? Well, I'll stop there. I have a story about an Uber driver who found out that I worked for FCC and went on to say, and this was about a major carrier that was sending out messages that meant nothing to him about whether one said likely scam, another one said block. but those terms didn't mean anything. So one of the things that the caller ID authentication group, that's Michael and Thaddeus, under their leadership, will be doing is trying to figure out how to message all that. Does that help? Sort of?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Nothing, so anything helps.
Oh, stop it. No, stop it.
So at 1:45 is the
1:30.
1:30 is
1:30, these
the caller
groups.
ID authentication will also.
With the caller ID group, well, that makes it easier to say, right?
Yeah.
That'll meet here in this room.
I wasn't aware of that.
And then the discussion on the reporting requirements that Karen talked about.
Is that a breakout?
That's a breakout session down the hall here. You go down the corridor as if you're going outside.
Yeah.
And you go
Okay.
402, 445.
What is it? What room?
Room 402, 445.
Which one is going down the hall and which one's staying here?
The caller ID authentication group.
Is here.
Is here.
Okay,
The one that you know you're on is here.
that's it.
Yes.
Yeah, and Karen's data requirements then is the
Discussion.
breakout.
That'll be the breakout, and we'll show you where that room is. It's very
The
nearby.
thing that Karen just talked about?
Yes.
Yes,
But she just talked about blocking and ID.
It's a discussion.
it's a discussion. It's not a working
It's not a
group
working
yet.
group.
It'll be to talk about what Karen.
So we may,
was talking about.
we may create a new working group as a result of this.
Right.
Oh.
Okay?
So it gets confusing.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
the,
there's too many authentications in there,
Right.
right?
right,
I
so,
understand it. I understand
It's a little
perfectly.
confusing.
so the current working,
slow.
the
You
current
have to
ID
go
working
slow.
group that will be here, they'll be kicking off because they're under a tight deadline
Yeah, they are.
to move up
December
and to
9th.
report potentially a
Exactly.
recommendation by December.
And they've got a messaging task, really, to figure out how to message what the little shake and stir emblem, whatever they use.
Let me just,
It means.
I hate to be redundant,
Sure.
but are you telling me that the call blocking and caller ID authentication, which is the other working group, as
Mm-hmm.
I understand it, or is going to be, I think that's where I asked to be,
That's where you are.
that's going to meet today?
Here.
At 1:30?
Yes, ma'am.
And how long are we scheduled to meet?
From about 1:30 to about 3, it's totally flexible in terms of how much discussion you want to do. Part of the activity will be to develop a work
Okay.
plan in terms of how much time you want to spend on this topic and how many meetings. And
And who's
the
leading
first-
that?
The first speaker will be Ed Bartholomew, who spoke earlier.
Well, he doesn't know anything.
And he doesn't know.
You can tell him I
And-
said that.
and, you asked who's leading that. It's Thaddeus and Michael.
So he'll be here at 1:30?
Ed will be back, I promise you, yes.
Okay.
Right here.
Yes,
All
right here.
So
right in this
I
very
just have
room.
to make a change in my schedule of travel today, so.
Okay.
Okay.
And then Karen's issue will be in the breakout.
Yep.
Okay.
Does that help?
No, but I'm still,
Okay.
yes, thank you.
Good.
Okay?
You remember now, you have to keep it for the slowest people in the
Oh,
group.
stop it.
So,
Stop it. Really. Really.
Yeah. Matthew?
Hey, Matt. Somebody just left the line, too. But it sounds like it.
There you go.
At the risk of asking an ignorant question, I don't recall that this afternoon's meetings were noticed, so some of us actually have conflicting arrangements. Was this sent out, these meeting notices?
Yes,
Yes.
They were?
yes.
Did anybody?
It was part of the agenda.
Right, as part of the agenda, in my cover, email
Is it?
also, talked about the breakout groups. I'm sorry if we didn't make the message clear enough, but they, certainly if you can't make this meeting, there are others that will be forthcoming, especially on the caller ID authentication group. It's just getting started today.
Oh, I see. There was a sentence that said.
And in fact,
"Following
we've got
lunch,
somebody
working groups will
calling,
meet
one
privately."
member that couldn't attend is calling in to the caller ID authentication
I can
group.
move. Here, no.
All right, so
And there's also a mailing list for that caller ID authentication group, the caller ID group, just like we do have for the full CAC. And that will be, that's operational too, and we'll have a sheet this afternoon about how to post messages there as well.
Okay, so if there's nothing else, then let's move ahead on the agenda. We're going to hear an update on digital opportunity data collection, and the presenters will be Kirk Burgee, Chief of Staff, and Garnett Hanley. She's the chief at Competition Infrastructure Policy Division. So with that, let me turn it over to those folks for the presentation. There. So we need to restart. Do you have a PowerPoint? Or you?
No, we're just-
Okay, good.
You're welcome. Good morning, everyone. So we're going to talk about the item that the Commission adopted on August 1st, which did a number of things. I'll be talking about the fixed side of that. So on August 1, as some of you I'm sure know, the Commission released a report and order and a further notice of proposed rulemaking concerning broadband data collection. So one of the most significant aspects of that was the creation of the Digital Opportunity Data Collection, which is a new broadband deployment data collection separate from the Form 477 data collection, which will continue to go on at least for the near future. The Digital Opportunity Data Collection will collect broadband deployment data from all providers of fixed broadband deployment services in the form of geospatial files, which will show on a geographic basis the specific areas where they're providing coverage. This is a change from what the Form 477 does, which collects by census blocks, which has its limitations, as I'm sure many of you know. So we see this as a significant improvement in terms of the granularity and the precision and the usefulness of the broadband deployment data that we'll be collecting. Another aspect of the DODC is that we will establish a platform for the submission of data from stakeholders, including consumers and governmental entities, who can dispute the deployment data that is submitted by providers. This is also a new feature that we think will greatly improve the quality of the data that we have available to make determinations about policy, and will be available to the public as well. The Universal Service Administrative Company will be tasked with administering this platform, and much of the day-to-day work associated with the collection of the data and the reporting will be subject to the close supervision of the FCC in that process. So the initial filing in the DODC will be 6 months after the FCC releases a public notice that the platform is available. Providers, filers will have an opportunity to file anytime after that public notice, but not later than 6 months after the public notice. And then after that, providers will be obligated to report revisions that would affect the accuracy of their data on file within 6 months of any change that results in that. And then there will be an annual certification required every June 30 by every provider that will certify to the accuracy of their data as of the prior December 31st. So in the second further notice, which was also adopted on August 1st, the FCC asked a lot of questions about how to implement this. One of the key features is whether or not we should establish technical parameters for the submission of the deployment data. That is, should we specify how providers, what they report based on features of their network or other technical specifications. We also asked a number of questions about how to establish the crowdsourced platform that I referenced earlier. There's a number of issues surrounding what would be the appropriate way to affect that. And the FCC is also looking at the next phase of deployment data, which would be the establishment of a location fabric database, which would establish a database that consists of every broadband serviceable location in the country. So this would be a layer, or ultimately be a layer of the broadband deployment data reporting that would establish where the locations actually are with geographic precision, so that this would be ultimately added to the coverage reporting to establish a full picture of broadband deployment on the fixed side. We also ask in the second further notice whether what we should at some point sunset the Form 477 deployment data reporting once the DODC platform is up and running and established as a useful tool. So comments on the issues raised in the second further notice will be due on September 23rd, and reply comments will be due on October 7th. Do you want to go?
Yep, great, thank you. Morning, everyone. Couple familiar faces. So I'm going to talk a bit about the mobile side in the August 1 item. In the report and order section, the commission decided to take steps to improve some of the existing 477 collections, and also to eliminate some of the data required that the commission believed was unnecessary. So first, the commission had decided that it was necessary to make clear that the wireless speed data was no longer going to be deemed confidential. So it made clear that the commission would publish provider-specific coverage maps on speed and it would be based on the technology used. So provider-specific maps with speed and the coverage for LTE, GSM, CDMA, and 5G. So in addition to that, in the report and order, the commission recognized that we were collecting some data on technology codes that it deemed was no longer necessary, like EVDO, Rev-A, various versions of 3G and so forth. And so we streamlined that process. We made clear that the service providers would submit 5G NR, which is the new technology for 5G. NR stands for new radio. LTE, CDMA-based, GSM-based technologies. So there would be provider-specific maps with speed for those different technologies. In addition to that, in the report and order, the commission took steps to provide more granular data on subscriber data. Previously, it was done at the state level, and the commission decided it was necessary to have more granular data. And so we're now going to require that the service providers submit wireless data at the census tract level. And this will be based on the subscriber's place of primary use for postpaid subscribers, and that prepaid subscribers will submit data based on the telephone number. So in addition, the commission decided that it was going to eliminate the collection of mobile retail availability data. Previously, service providers would submit a list of census tracts where they were offering service. This was a requirement that had been in place for many years, and really it was somewhat duplicative of requiring the deployment data. So the commission decided it would eliminate this requirement and look more towards improving the deployment data. So in the further notice, the commission did ask a lot of questions about improving the collection of mobile coverage data. The commission decided it wasn't time yet to transition the mobile coverage data to the DODC, or Digital Opportunity Data Collection Fund, as Kirk had described. There were still a lot of things that the commission needed to understand. You know, the commission did Mobility Fund Phase 2, universal service collection, and it's still learning from that. And we recognized we probably needed to refresh the record on these issues, given the complexities with collecting mobile coverage data. The commission asked a lot of questions. In particular, it asked comments on standardizing the parameters for coverage maps. In the Mobility Fund Phase 2 program, it did standardize parameters. The commission requested detailed information about what the industry and outside parties have learned from that process is to inform the commission for future data collection in, that the commission on an ongoing basis should require. So it asked a lot of questions about that. It asked about the format, what kind of GIS polygon data it should request. It also asked for questions about whether the commission should consider collecting infrastructure information, whether that would help provide more granularity for the commission in analyzing wireless coverage data. And also, as Kirk had explained, the commission asked a lot of questions about what we refer to as crowdsourcing data, whether it's, consumers doing speed test apps and submitting that data, or whether it's drive test on the ground data on drive tests. We asked questions about drone data, and whether that would help enlighten the commission in better providing more verification and accuracy of wireless coverage data. The commission had noted that after the hurricanes in Puerto Rico, the commission did some drive testing and drone testing data, recognizing that drone testing data is new in the industry, and it's especially helpful in areas where you can't take a car. And, there are some unique factors that the commission needs to consider because of drone testing, but wanted to seek comment on those type of issues as, a tool that the commission could use to further verify accuracy of wireless coverage data. In addition to the request for information about improving wireless coverage data, the commission also asked further questions about getting more granular subscriber data from service providers. More specifically, the commission asked about breaking out some of the subscriber data by, who the service provider serves: enterprise, wholesale, government, prepaid, postpaid. So the commission sought comment on getting, whether it should consider requiring some of that more detailed subscriber data. And then finally, the commission also sought comment about sunsetting Form 477 data and transitioning it over to the digital opportunity data collection, similar to what Kirk had talked about, that USAC is putting up this new system to collect the fixed data. So those are some of the issues that the commission both addressed in the report and order and teed up for further notice on wireless coverage data and subscriber data. The comment cycle is the same for the mobile side as it is for fixed. So I guess we're going to receive comments in the next week and a half. And I think from the Wireless Bureau's perspective, we certainly encourage as much outside input on these issues. We recognize, wireless coverage data is extremely difficult because of the uniqueness of wireless, the fact that, just even coverage and speed data can differ depending on who's on the network. The topography, when the leaves are on the tree, it could impact, the speed and coverage and so forth and signal strength. So So we recognize there's a lot of complexity with the probabilistic nature of wireless and the networks, so we encourage a lot of input on that as the commission moves forward in, setting new parameters around collection of wireless coverage data. So that's all I have, and open for any questions that anyone has.
Thank you.
Okay, well, wait, I have some questions.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the speed accuracy issue, like as it relates to.
Are you, for wireless?
For wireless.
Sure.
And I guess it could be for other networks as it relates to, that are subject to congestion. How do you envision something like that being reported? I mean, I can tell you what my maximum might be, but if everyone's hitting carriage return at the same time, the network, slows down. And so what were you thinking? How would something like that work?
Currently, right now, the requirement for the submission of speed data is based on minimum average or expected speed.
Okay.
So if parties have suggestions of different ways that we should better seek information from service providers on how to calculate, at the end of the day, what consumers could reasonably expect in terms of speed. But to keep in mind, again, it's nothing's going to be perfect when it comes to the wireless because of the uniqueness of wireless and all the different factors that could impact speed at certain times of the day. So right now, again, we go back to minimum advertised or expected speed, which is what is currently required. And if parties have suggestions of better ways to get at what consumers could reasonably expect and how we should collect that information, then we encourage folks to submit that to us.
And just a quick follow-up too, and like in regard to small providers, WISPs and others.
Yep.
Are there exemptions that say of a certain size? Is there are they exempt from reporting requirements, or does everyone?
Everyone has to
Everyone
submit.
will, okay.
That's under current requirements.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
So we have a question over here from Irene.
As a consumer who has to get broadband wirelessly, and that's the only option, census tract is an awfully big measurement level.
Are you talking about for calculating subscriber data? Because that's for subscriber data. Because the ultimate goal is if you have a coverage map, that the map has a capability to zoom in within addresses and so forth. But when I talked about census tract, that was on subscriber data.
So it'll be
Okay.
block level, potentially, or?
Well, I mean, so again, I think the ultimate goal is to have maps that could zoom in within, like if you have an address. I mean,
Okay.
Currently, service providers have on their websites maps that you typically can put in your address and zoom in. And I recognize you're smiling and saying, but you're not sure how accurate those are. But then that goes towards
Based on my experience.
Right, I recognize, and the FCC doesn't necessarily know the methodologies that the service providers are implementing to create those coverage maps, but the FCC is sought comment on setting standardized parameters of the methodologies that service providers will implement to submit the shape files or GIS polygons that they will submit to us. And that might not necessarily represent the same methodologies they use to create the coverage maps on their websites. So we will decide the standardized parameters, and that's what we have sought comment on.
But it'll provide it in that manner. It'll provide a common format across different providers, so we can, there's basically we're talking one definition, one language.
That's correct.
And that's
We're
the purpose
talking
of that.
standardized methodologies because currently under the 477 requirements,
Okay.
The service provider has the discretion to decide the methodology of how they submit the shapefiles to us. And we ask for a brief description of how they do it, but they have the discretion right now. And we have sought comment on standardizing those methodologies because we recognize that is a way we can improve the accuracy of the wireless maps.
All right, thank you. So we have another question from Vonda. Ms. Rach, yeah.
Oh, okay. I would like, if you could please describe to me more about the DODC, the Digital Opportunity Data Collection. You said geospatial and something else. I'm very interested in a little bit more about that, please.
Okay. So what the providers will be submitting to the FCC are essentially maps of coverage. So it's a very precise and specific method of conveying coverage. And our intention is to make this, beg your pardon?
I said that sounds like it'd be much better data.
We think it will be. We think it's going to be a big improvement in the sense that you'll be able to look at the display of the data and it will show you where coverage is and isn't in a very specific way that isn't available now.
Using satellites, or I'm aware about shapefiles and census tract.
It would be shapefiles. That's another way to say it.
But using satellite imagery? Or?
No, it's the providers will determine the shape of their coverage based on the characteristics of their networks. They may use satellites in that process, satellite information, but it will be based on the information on the ground.
Okay. I know that there can be bleed over because sometimes if someone's on the border, you as a service provider may provide coverage to those people over your border, network border. And so, but this, you all feel this will be more accurate?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. Irene, did you want to get one in here?
There are two more things I wanted to ask about. We have what's known as fixed wireless, and very often our speeds and so forth vary. But it's not at all unusual for, say, 10:30 in the morning in a very rural area, or 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock at night to be low times, which makes no sense to us because we don't think those are times in the area that there would be lots of usage. But just be aware that there are these drops, and it can go for 30 minutes to an hour. I don't know what's going on, but I know we are having trouble with that. The other thing, as you're talking about the maps and with the wireless, I used to be able to use my cell phone consistently on a 13-mile drive that now drops calls 5 or 6 times in between there. And I think that whole area is shown as served, and yet it's not, something we can count on.
Sure. In regards to the
Time of day?
The time of day issue and so forth. I mean, so we recognize that having outside sources come in and tell us where they think the coverage is inaccurate and so forth. So we have sought comment on utilizing crowdsourcing data. And again, I say crowdsourcing data. Maybe it's more like a term of art within the industry, but it's basically getting input from whether it's local governments or state governments submitting data saying, this company's coverage data is inaccurate. It says on their map, on their website that they're serving, but that's not consistent with what the constituents are saying. And so we are seeking comment on having a process so that outside parties have an opportunity to submit data to us indicating that these coverage areas are inaccurate. So we recognize the things that you're raising, and we're seeking comment on how to create a resource for third parties to come in and let us know where the coverage is inaccurate.
Okay. Okay, let me see. Johnny?
I was just kind of curious what the map would look like. Would it be a single map showing both wired and wireless? Like if I punch in my address, is it going to show me every provider that provides service alphabetically by speed, or what's the map or maps going to look like?
So right now, the DODC will just be the fixed side of the equation, which will include fixed wireless, but it will be fixed technologies. There's a lot to be decided about the map. We want to try to make it as useful as possible to as many stakeholders as we can. I think the things you described, it's pretty reasonable to think we would put those features into it, but that's something we're still looking at and working on right now. So.
All right, Johnny, does that help? Is there anyone online that have any questions? Anyone on the phone? Okay, well, thank you very much. That was very informative. Let me just ask you, before you leave, if you want to just wrap through what the progression, the time deadlines are for, what's happening in terms of the notice. It might be helpful just to get a quick update on that before we leave.
Sure. So as I mentioned, the comment deadline is coming up. It's September 23rd. And then after that, reply comments will be due on October 7. There are no fixed timeframes after that I'm aware of. We'll have to go through a Paperwork Reduction Act process that typically lasts about 6 months, I think. And we'll be working to create these platforms, and we're very interested in doing it quickly. But there's quite a bit to it. It's a very complicated process, as you can probably imagine. So I'm afraid that's not as most satisfying answer, but we are trying to get it done as quickly as we can.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. Okay, is Lori here? Okay. Excellent. So now we're going to get an update on pending legislation of interest to consumers. So our presenter today is Lori Morbeer. She's with the Office of Legislative Affairs. Lori, let me turn it over to you. I glanced ahead on this, and this is a pretty interesting slideshow, so thank you for being here.
Figure out how where I am on here. Here I am.
If you play it in file
I got it.
and click on it, it should open up. And then you use the little clicker to advance from slide to slide.
I got it.
Cool.
Good morning. How's everybody? I'm great for a Monday morning. The sun is shining. It's still 90 degrees in Washington. I'm from Legislative Affairs, as they said. I deal with Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureaus, Media Bureau, and International Bureau issues. So my main focus is keeping track of what Congress is doing and helping congressional offices answer questions from their constituents when they have issues with the commission. And so I'm here to talk to you about the consumer-related bills. I'll go in more specifics about the robocall bills, the Senate bill and the House bill. And I also have in my slides information on all the privacy bills that are making their way around the Senate. I know that y'all are probably interested in those. While they don't have as much to do with the FCC, there's a brief description of each of them, and I can give you some general background on where they're at and what's Congress is thinking of doing in those areas. But first, we can talk about the TRACED Act. So this is the bill that Senator Thune introduced. It has passed the Senate pretty overwhelmingly, 97-1. It is specific in that it requires the FCC to implement shake and stir call authentication, and that has to be done within 18 months. We have to report to Congress on the implementation within 1 year of enactment, and then we have to give Congress an assessment every 3 years. It would require the creation of an interagency working group, so it would require the FCC to work with other government officials to come up with a way just to talk as entire government of how to deal with the robocall problems. It also increases the forfeitures for intentional violations, so it would take the base forfeiture currently in the statute and for intentional robocall violations would require an additional $10,000 forfeiture on top of that. The bill also increases the statute of limitations to 3 years for intentional robocall violations from the current 1-year statute of limitations. That would give the FCC more time to investigate and go after intentional robocallers. Requires the FCC to start a rulemaking on spoofing protection within 1 year of enactment, and requires the FCC to start a rulemaking on access to number resources within 180 days of enactment. And then finally, there's an annual report on TCPA enforcement. So the Senate bill, like I said, moved pretty quickly through the Senate and is currently awaiting, well, we'll get to that, but the staffs are talking with each other. Because they have to negotiate with the House side now. So the House has their own version of the Stopping Bad Robocalls Act. Again, it passed on suspension on the House back in July, overwhelmingly 429 to 3. So it's a bipartisan effort, moved pretty quickly again once they figured out what they wanted to do. It is a bit different than the Senate bill. As you can see, there's a few more bullets on this slide. They make us do a few more things, more reporting, it seems. But one of the major differences between the two bills is that the House bill doesn't dictate what type of call authentication technology the commission is required to implement. And so they kept it more technology neutral. They wanted to give the FCC the ability to decide what would be best. We would have to enact within 1 year and then require the providers to implement to consumers within 6 months after we establish our rules. So it's along the same sort of time frame, they believe, as the Senate bill, just in a different way of getting there. Requires the same interagency working group creation, so it's the language is virtually identical, so that shouldn't be an issue going forward. It also increases the forfeitures for intentional violations, similarly to the Senate bill. On statute of limitations, there's a few differences here. The House bill gives a 3-year statute of limitation for general robocall violations, and it gives a 4-year statute of limitation for intentional violations. And then it also provides a 4-year statute of limitations for caller ID spoofing violations, which is something that would be helpful to the Enforcement Bureau here. It requires annual reports on enforcement, annual robocall report on the status of private-led efforts on traceback. Requires the FCC to establish a process to streamline voluntary information sharing, and requires us to take final action within 1 year of enactment on free robocall blocking services. So that's, again, a big difference between the House bill and the Senate bill. And requires the FCC to start a proceeding on one-ring scams within 120 days of enactment, and we have to report to Congress within 1 year. So those are the major sort of things. There might be a few other minor things here and there between the two bills, but right now, the staffs are talking with one another, the Senate and House staff, so they're trying to figure out how to move forward. It was reported, I think, at the end of last week that they believe those talks are going well. Again, like I said, the biggest difference between these two bills is the requirement to, on the one hand, on the Senate bill, to implement shake and stir versus having a more general requirement for the FCC to implement call authentication technology. And so it'll be interesting to see which way they end up going, if they're going to get to a final agreement. Statute of limitations, while it shouldn't be an issue to resolve those, given that the Senate didn't have the same exact language, they would have to work through those as well. So we're kind of in a wait-and-see mode to see where the staff come out, and then ultimately what type of language is going to result that they might be able to act on. There's great incentive for them to do it. They want to do it. So we fully anticipate that they're going to continue to work towards that goal. But there's not any clear indication of when that actually might happen. All right. I know y'all wanted to talk about Senate privacy bills, or just privacy bills in general. So I've taken a few pages in my, there's 12 Senate privacy bills. And so this, again, is a big issue that everybody is interested in. While we here in Legislative Affairs, we're monitoring this, Virtually all of these bills are pointed towards the FTC. There's not an FCC role here. So we are just kind of in a monitoring situation where we keep track of them. The reason why a lot of bills have been introduced is because there isn't one framework that they've settled on yet. Now, Senator Wicker, the chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, is very interested in getting a national privacy framework bill completed. He has said in the past that he wanted to have a bill done and out for public consumption by Labor Day, but again, at the end of last week, he's reported as saying that they're probably not going to make that deadline. So yet to be seen what is going to happen with that. Again, reporting indicates that they had a bipartisan working group of several senators that had been working earlier this year. They've held hearings. And then earlier this year, before August recess, the talks had then just resulted between Senator Wicker and Senator Cantwell. And so they are trying to focus on getting a bill done. I understand that Senator Cantwell wants to have a private right of action included in any bill. So again, that might be one area where it would take a little bit of negotiating between the two sides. Also recently reported that Senator Blumenthal and Senator Moran are working on their own bill. So they were part of the bigger working group earlier in the year, and they're still working towards having something as well. Again, like I said, I won't run through all of the specifics of all these bills because you have copies of it, but a lot of it just is focusing on notification to consumers. A lot of the different bills, notification to consumers is the biggest issue, getting their consent as well. Some of the bills talk about having the consumers the right to get their data back and delete their data. A lot of them talk about having options or preferences that consumers can establish for their privacy and their data online. Like I said before, virtually all of them, except for one, are going to be implemented by the FTC. There is one that's towards the back here, the Dashboard Act. That one's the only one that's been referred to a different committee. It's been referred to the Senate Banking Committee because there's SEC rules involved as well. Because they're tying it back to how the data is being collected and how it's being used for profit. And so that's why it's been referred to a different committee on the Senate side. So there's lots of activity on the Senate side, many bills. We'll see how many of these different aspects. I think everybody's introducing their own bill to kind of lay their marker down and to see if they can make it into a larger framework bill that's being worked on. On the House side, not quite as much action. So we've got two bills, two major bills that are introduced, and one of them is a companion bill to one of the Senate bills. That was the algorithm. I can never say it. The Clark bill. We'll just say HR 2231. So that deals with the algorithms, and that's a companion bill to Senator Wyden's bill in the Senate. And then the only other major privacy bill that's been introduced by Representative Del Bene, again, talks about opt-in consent for the collection, storing, processing, selling, or sharing of sensitive data. Representative Del Bene is not on the Energy and Commerce Committee where it's been referred to, so that might have an impact on on whether or not there'll be hearings. But I think that's it. That's pretty much what I have to say. Anybody have any questions?
Questions? Anyone? Online? On the phone, any questions?
So good.
So the prospects, there's a lot of things out there, but it doesn't look like much will happen this year.
They want to do a bill. But again, the timeline, given that Senator Wicker said that his timeline has kind of shifted, so he's not going to make his original goal of Labor Day. Unclear as to when they might have something done. But there's a lot of senators who are very interested, and so they'll keep on pushing, but not clear.
Great, thank you for the update. Anyone else? Any questions?
Just so good.
All right. Lori?
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Most of my career is just I love this stuff. Yeah. Fun.
Keep you guys ahead of schedule, too.
Take care. Thank you very much.
All right, so let's turn our attention to the next item on the agenda. So what we hear now is an update on the electronic comment filing system, ECFS, and its redesign. The presenter will be Marlene Deutsch. Is it Cheryl or Marlene?
It's Marlene.
Marlene, okay. Marlene Deutsch, how about that? It seems like I write to you so many times, but
I know, I'm so popular, old at or high school, right? This popular.
so.
I've never been this close to her either.
All right, so she's on the redevelopment team. So.
There you go.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Marlene. I'm glad you could come.
So, thank you. I feel so special. I'm excited to be here too. So I'm here to talk to you today about what's new with the Commission's electronic comment filing system. And I also have here with me today Cheryl Siegel, who is the Associate Secretary for Information Resources. So for those who, not sure who is or is not familiar with the electronic comment filing system, or ECFS as we call it here at the FCC, but it's actually just what it says, the comment filing system, and that allows people to submit comments electronically to the FCC. And it's also used internally as well by the bureaus and offices here at the Commission to access filings before the Commission. So previously we've upgraded the system, but this time we're actually going to create a newly developed system. So it will be tailored to current concerns and issues. And so rather than just upgrading something that's old, we're going to develop a brand new system. And we're really excited about that opportunity, because it really is what it is, a great opportunity to use technology to develop a new system. So what you can do with ECFS for searching databases, for filings within proceedings, we're going to improve with the current demands. And so we think that this will be a significant upgrade from where we are currently. So even though we are fixing some of the issues that occur right now, our focus is on developing a brand new system. So where are we? So for the last year or so, the Office of the Secretary, the Consumer and Government Affairs Bureau, and Information Technology, we've collaborated in what we call our discovery phase. And it's really a term of art for analyzing and documenting in detail all the things that we use ECFS for to accomplish our work here at the FCC. So that includes all the bureaus and offices here in the Commission, and we've worked together to kind of incorporate any suggestions and to make sure that we document how people internally use the system. And we've incorporated all of those processes and suggestions. We've included the Inspector General's office, the General Accountability Office, and really had a clear understanding of our core functions. So that's, we can make sure that we have everything incorporated in the new system. So, and that has, taken an extended amount of time. So where we are now in discovery is we're working on our second phase, and that includes our external stakeholders. And so once we've completed determining all of those issues with the external stakeholders, we think we would have a system that would allow us to best serve the public. So what types of improvements have we already thought about? So we focused on some various areas. There's the authentication and roles. And so that would be similar to like a commercial user, like online shopping, where a user can interact with the system either as a registered user or as a guest. The idea being it will be convenient for people who frequently file, but would also not require those people who really don't want to register. So making it convenient for all types of users. Security of incoming filings and processes. We plan to use CAPTCHA or something similar, a software to distinguish from machine input or spam in ECFS, which has happened in the past. And so we're looking to make sure that we avoid those types of issues that have happened in the past, and to keep pace with technology. We also have looked at the petition for rulemaking and docket creation, docketed and non-docketed filing process, how we can make those processes easier for both internal and external users, and much more automated than it has been in the past. And another area we've looked at is reporting and analytics. We have a lot of data and valuable data in our system, and so how can we provide software that's used to access that data in a way that makes it easier to offload, and so that internal and external users can more easily analyze the data according to whatever needs you have. I think our idea basically is, how can we make it more user-friendly with this data that we collect every day? So how do we plan on doing external outreach? Well, we will be hosting in October and early November roundtable sessions, several roundtable sessions, because we really do value the input from external stakeholders, and we want to have a comprehensive approach, and so we need your feedback to help us make the system the best it can be. And we want it to be as helpful as possible, and so we need your input to do that. So if you are interested in attending a roundtable session, we would love to hear from you, and we're here today to take any suggestions or questions that you might have. So, thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions from the floor here? Johnny?
I was just gonna say, if you're doing no. Hello?
Yeah, there you are.
I was gonna say, if you do the security, I don't know if this counts as capture or not, but you're doing the thing where you gotta identify the cars and the photos. Don't do that. You know, it's like, is that a car in the
Right.
background? Those things are impossible.
I know what you mean.
Anyone else in the room? Anyone on the phone? Any questions?
One over there.
Someone in the room back there. Yeah, identify.
Yes.
Make sure you
Yeah,
identify.
yeah,
Identify yourself.
yeah, identify yourself, please.
Hi, everyone. Jonathan Naked.
Are you taking
Hi,
notes?
everyone.
Did we do
Jonathan
press?
Naked.
Yeah, it's
Check
okay.
with them.
Yeah, you can-
Daily. Obviously, we're always
This
interested
one
in
right
DCFS enhancements. I just wanted to ask for a thing for Cheryl. When you talk about automation, could that also, or will that likely also include allowing filings to be posted more in real time? Like Edgar is an example at the SEC where there doesn't necessarily have to be staff intervention. Staff can still see the filings and, manipulate and sort them, but don't necessarily need to, trigger them to be posted. So I was just curious about that.
So just so we have it, so the redesign, about the redesign, will things be posted? I mean, how will that, more timely, how will that be affected?
I appreciate your input, and I didn't quite hear exactly what you said, but I know that that is something that we do now, and that we will definitely take down what you've said and make sure that we consider that in our development process.
Okay.
Did you? Right. So we do have, currently, we have a 2-hour delay, and the delay is for support to those who do file, to make sure that we post what is accurate. So, yeah, sometimes a filer may have made a mistake. Sometimes every now and then. So we want to make sure that we're timely, but that it gives the filer the opportunity to file what they intend to file.
So there's a buffer there.
There's a cushion.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Christina, you have a,
Oh, yes. Marlene, is this on? Yeah. So my question to you is about the consideration of a verification process, so that, are you guys considering looking at any kind of enhanced verification process so that there is a way to authenticate that the filer is actually the filer of the particular document? Are you guys exploring that at all?
Yes, we have. Do you want to elaborate on the technology?
There's a balance between authentication and allowing people to freely file without having a chilling effect. So we have to be careful not to inhibit people from filing, and that sometimes means that we get filings that are perhaps frivolous, to be kind. And we rely on the discretion of the attorneys who analyze the incoming filings to differentiate. But we also are looking at we are hoping that the roles that we establish will help minimize those kinds of filings.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you.
okay. Rhonda, do you have a question?
Hi. Relates to searchability. Do you expect improvements related to, say, rulemakings can be extremely long, over years' time. So if one pulls up, an order or NPRM and a FNPRM, and it goes back, so they know the most current one, but it may have started, say, in 1998. Will there be some kind of branch association with all of the FCC? I'm not speaking to the comments, because that would be extremely difficult, but just associating a given rulemaking documents that the FCC releases would be great, all of them.
Thank you for that suggestion.
Okay.
Steve, I had
Yep.
I think my question was even more basic than that. Mine was just, am I on? Am I on?
No.
No, I'm not on.
There you go.
Now I'm on. My question was even more basic about improving the search capabilities. And I didn't know if that was part of what you were also working on, was helping consumers to be able to search for filings and by subject matter, which is sometimes very challenging. So I wasn't sure if that was part of this as well.
Yes, again, thank you for the suggestion. Yes, that is what we are looking at, how we can use technology now that, before we did the best we could with what we had. So I think with technology now, we can certainly improve on our search capabilities, and that is one of the major focuses of what we hope to do with this new system.
Okay. We have another question? Yep.
Hi, Olivia Wine, National Consumer Law Center. I just wanted to know a little bit more about the next step processes. So if groups or stakeholders were interested in providing input and sort of what are these entry points? So will there be a notice sent out about the October, November roundtables? Will there be particular questions you're interested in feedback on? And then sort of post-roundtable discussions, if there are outside groups that would like to provide some input, what would be their best avenue into providing them, Thanks.
I think our next phase is the external stakeholder meetings, and we will be sending out invitations to external groups who are, and if you are interested, please let us know, and we will make sure that we reach out to you specifically, and that's our next phase. And as we move forward, we will determine what the phase after that will look like. So, but in each process, making sure that we get input from as many people as possible, groups as possible.
Thank you, Olivia. Just Scott?
Yeah, it's Scott Marshall. Am I on here, hopefully? Marlene, we have an electronic distribution list for CAC. So if you have a notice about these external meetings that you're inviting people to, I'd be happy to send it out. It would not be a CAC activity because we have to, as you probably know, post in the Federal Register when we meet and all the rest of that stuff.
It's informational.
As you well know, but it's informational, and individual members of the CAC can, as they have done in the past, participate in roundtables and provide you with the information you need and do it quite quickly.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay, so just let me check the phone if there's any questions. And hearing none, thank you, Marlene and Cheryl. I appreciate you coming out and giving us an update on that.
Thank you. Thank you for your input.
people about.
So we have another item
the system.
here on our agenda is the consideration of robocall blocking recommendation. Before I turn it over to Brian Young, Sam's not here today, so it'll be up to you. But I just wanted to note again up front that the robocall working group has done an incredible job, put in a lot of hard work, 2 calls a week. It's just been a dedicated effort to meet a very, very short timeline. And thanks to everyone in that working group for contributing and participating and working. And thank you and Sam for the leadership in getting this done. So we've come up with the working group has come up with a recommendation on the robocall blocking. And so at this time, let me call on Brian Young to explain the recommendation to the CAC.
And Brian will also move adoption for the working group, and we'll need a second to get the discussion started. Do we have a quorum?
Oh, there we go. Thank you for those. Yeah, thank you for those kind words, Steve. Good afternoon. As Steve mentioned, Sam is unavailable to join. He's in London experiencing some technical difficulties in joining the bridge. But the robocall working group was tasked with determining how consumers should be educated about the types of calls that may be blocked, how providers could notify consumers that calls have been blocked, what types of calls should be included on the critical calls list, and how the Commission should define outbound numbers of 911 call centers. Now, over a period of 8 weeks, the working group met 11 times and solicited feedback from several CAC members that were not serving on our working group to ensure that all perspectives could be included in this document. Now, you all have the recommendation in front of you, so I won't bore you by going through it line by line. But generally, our recommendation suggests that service providers clearly disclose the types of calls that could be blocked, as well as the risks that a legitimate call could be blocked as well. Now, this information should be followed with clear instructions on how to opt out if the consumer should choose to do so. Similarly, the recommendation suggests that consumers should be able to manage their choices through a customer portal of some sort, via trained store employees or other options that are provided by the provider. The recommendation also suggests that once the opt-out program is introduced, that consumers should be notified of its presence at the point of sale, in consumer bills, online, by mail, as well as other means that the provider chooses. The recommendation also suggests that consumers should be appropriately notified when a call is blocked and have access to a block call log or similar tool that consumers can access at will to find out if calls intended for them are indeed blocked. Similarly, the recommendation states that consumers should have options to easily report numbers that have been erroneously blocked. Now, the working group felt that the FCC has a role to play in educating consumers. As such, the Commission should collaborate with the Federal Trade Commission, consumer groups, industry, state attorneys generals, libraries, broadcasters, as well as to utilize social media methods to help ensure that the word is getting pushed out about the types of options consumers have, as well as the rights to opt out if they should choose to do so. After much deliberation, the working group determined that critical call lists should remain as narrow as possible and include government numbers only, with a few carefully considered exemptions for genuine emergency calls. The list should include outbound numbers employed by public safety answering points, or PSAPs, as well as the backup PSAP numbers, FEMA, the Department of Homeland Security, as well as all government numbers used to make emergency calls regarding threats to physical safety or that are needed for benefits and government services. We believe that the list should be reviewed periodically and to add new numbers and to remove redundant numbers. During the review process, we urged the Commission to remember that the FCC should remain cognizant that as the size of the list increases, as does its potential to become more vulnerable to fraud and abuse. Further, it is our suggestion that the operators of the critical calls list should rely on emergency entities themselves to report the relevant numbers, that the database operator must employ a vetting process to ensure that the numbers fall into one of the categories I listed above. And that, in brief, is our recommendation. So are there any questions?
Well, before we do that, the working group should move to adopt then?
Oh, and with that, I move to adopt, that the full CAC adopts the recommendation.
Okay, now we have a second?
Second. Great.
Okay, with that, now let's open it up for questions, discussions, and amendments or whatever, if we're ready to go. Anyone have any questions? Or any discussion? This is well vetted, I think. Anyone on the call still? Okay.
No questions.
Okay, no questions, no discussion? No amendments? Shall we call for a vote?
Call for a vote.
Okay. Okay, so with that, do we, all in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Those opposed? Say nay. Okay. And abstentions? Any abstentions? Unanimous. Wow. So with that,
Congratulations, everybody.
yeah, so with that, then, we've adopted the recommendation that had come out of the robocall block working group, and that recommendation will be, I will file, with the FCC and send it to the commissioners for their attention. So thank you, everyone, for your hard work. Before I do anything else, let me just give Debbie the microphone for a second.
Yeah. I'm glad I can say this after it passed unanimously, rather than during the discussion time. I just want to pour many accolades on this working group for all the hard work that went into producing an excellent document in record time. It was a group effort, but I also want to thank my colleague Brian Young, National Consumers League alternate on this working group, for stepping up and leading, and ably partnered with Sam for this great effort. So, thank you so much, Brian. Sam's not here today to also get the thanks, but thank you so much for everything that you did to make this a superb effort. I also want to thank a couple of other members of the working group who participated with writing drafts and, stepped up to volunteer to do that. So it was a great group effort. So thank you, everyone in this working group, for the great product that you produced. And
Yeah.
obviously, wonderful. So thank you.
One of the most concise presentations.
And a great presentation.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Well done.
Yeah, thanks so much. So with that, as we wrap up, I just want to first, let me just open it up, see if there's any comments from the public. And hearing none.
Okay.
Let me just note that the CAC next meeting will be December 9th.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay, and just a reminder as well that at 1:30, we'll have a private working group meeting on the call authentication issue, as well as the robocall reporting requirements. So the authentication ID will be in this room, okay, and then the robocall reporting requirements will be in conference room C, 402, 445. So,
We'll show you where it is.
and I'll have an announcement in just a second, but yes, Stephen.
About the possible new working group, will there be a process for volunteering? If I can't go to the meeting, you're having at 1:30.
Yes. The answer is yes. There will be a process for volunteering
there
for
was
that.
before.
What is the determination for whether or not that becomes a working group?
I'll let you do
Okay,
that.
sure. I think it will become a working group, as we did for the previous two working groups. Patrick will send you and Steve a letter with the charge, with the questions to be presented for the working group. And I think you should have that probably this week.
I see.
It's in the works. And then we'll go on to do
I see.
the volunteer solicitation
Got it.
for whether people want to work on that group or not. But the other group, the caller ID group, that's already established, ready to go, and has its 13 members. That's as many as we can have on
Got
a
it.
working group, by the way. And they're going to launch today. But, and we'll get the other group up and running as quickly as possible. And the idea there also is to ideally have a recommendation for the December 9th meeting. But we realize that may not be possible, but that's the goal.
Okay.
Okay. Michael has a
Michael?
question.
Michael? Yep.
One of the co-chairs of the caller ID group. Hi, Michael.
Okay. Well, thank you. So Thaddeus and I are co-chairs of the working
Yes.
group, as was mentioned. First of all, we look forward to hopefully hearing from Brian and Sam offline as to best practices for getting this done, because I think we have a similarly compressed timeline. But we were just curious as if it makes sense to maybe see who in our working group is planning to join us today.
That's a good idea.
Just given the confusion around the meeting time, wondering if folks could indicate if they were
good idea.
planning to stay, and if we don't
Yeah,
have a
show of hands.
Yep.
Let's do that.
You also have one person who's going to be calling in on the phone
Okay.
that I'm aware
Right.
of.
So is that 1, 2,
1, 2.
3?
Kyle Hildebrand will call in.
How many?
Hildebrand and another one, Brian
So
Hurley
1,
will
2,
call
3,
in.
4, 5, 6.
Okay. So I'm wondering if
We need to do
we
this
might
differently.
do this remotely then, given that only less than half of the members would be able to join, or
So
Yep.
if there's not enough people, and you don't think it would be
Oh,
valuable.
let's see. Thaddeus, you had a comment?
Thaddeus, go ahead.
Yeah, so what was the final number of people where do we have 6 people?
13 you have in the group.
13 and a total of 6 people today were able to make it? 7?
I saw 6 hands.
Yeah, that's a quorum.
I saw 6 hands myself. I don't know. How many people are here at, well, we don't have to go through it. We gotta do these differently. We have to do these differently.
So,
Okay, so maybe we'll chat among the group members immediately afterward and see what everyone's schedules are.
Can I ask how many people are planning to stay for the discussion? The other discussion?
so on the caller ID authentication,
Caller ID authentication, raise of hands, how many planning to stay for that?
The reporting requirements you're talking
yeah.
about?
No.
Not the caller ID,
No.
I'm sorry, I'm, not that.
Yeah.
The name of the other one?
Oh, reporting requirements.
Reporting
What are we
requirements.
calling that one?
Reporting requirements.
Reporting requirements, thank you.
Okay.
We need a new name. Okay, reporting requirements.
That's what you can call it now. You can come up with a better name than
Yeah,
that,
we
but
need a good name for that.
Okay.
All right. It's what Karen was talking about, Karen
Yeah.
Schroeder.
How many are staying
Effectiveness.
for that? 1, 2,
2, 3,
3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
6.
5. 6.
I may set it, so.
I may stay. Okay. Okay.
So do we
All right.
continue to do it, or are we postponing things here?
Lunch is not here, is it? I don't see lunch.
Not yet. It should be here about 20 minutes.
Okay, well, I mean, maybe it's just worthwhile, that, you know, if we want to, we can just have an informal discussion and then talk about, you know, maybe setting up, you know, a next call or something like that, just to kind of get things moving. If
Is it possible to start this now?
we could.
Instead of waiting till 1:30, it's 12:30.
Right.
It's
Okay.
12:20.
You could.
Why are we waiting till 1:30?
Okay.
Anybody want to do that?
Yes.
Well, the working group sessions are private. They're not public, so.
When you stop, I've already called my driver twice.
Well,
Okay.
we need to know when we're starting in order to know when we stop.
And can we
Well,
just kind of
how
get
about-
something here so that I
let's just do
feel
this,
comfortable?
then.
I've
Sorry,
got
Then
an
if-
appointment
I'm
to make.
taking over.
If we're set today with the full, you know, CAC, then why don't we move to adjourn, and then we'll continue discussion as breakout groups so we can keep things private.
Well, how long are we going to
Good
do
idea.
that is what I'm asking.
No, your point is well taken. Let's adjourn.
All
So
right,
we
we
can-
adjourn, and then we'll have the discussion group, the one that we're going to do, the ID.
We'll go immediately after, and we'll just see if it has legs, we'll continue with it, or we'll just, you know,
But
we'll-
let's adjourn.
That
Well-
doesn't help me in terms of when I'm leaving, because I've got an appointment to get to.
But surely his point is let's adjourn and then continue the discussion on logistics.
I understand that. I
She
understand
wants to know
that.
how
Okay,
long
never mind.
They don't know.
Go.
okay.
That, it was
Ask for-
scheduled originally.
Ask for a motion to adjourn.
All right, so
Yeah.
let's ask for a motion to adjourn,
So moved.
and second. And with that, this session is
favor?
ended.
Okay,
All right,
all right.
all in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
And we have adjourned.
Okay, now.
Now, with that, we can talk
Now we can
privately.
talk to logistics privately.
So, yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like this is something that can probably move pretty quickly.
Now, wait a minute, okay, we have to talk in the microphones too,
Okay,
while we're in here, for captioning purposes. Okay, go
Oh,
ahead.
we do.
Yeah,
okay.
yep.
All right, so, yeah, just by the way, there is lunch coming, but, you know, that'll be a while, and there's alternative places as well. But in the meantime, it's is it worthwhile for us just to split for a few minutes in
Sure.
each room?
Sure,
We'll
and
just
then we'll
split for a
notify
few
you
minutes
when
in each
the
room, so
food arrives,
we'll
yeah.
have the
will
caller
be in
ID
here.
authentication will
Here.
continue here.
Yes.
And the few people interested in the reporting requirements and effectiveness issue, we can go over to, is it 405?
402,
402, and let's just have a quick discussion, and let's just see if there's interest in continuing the discussion, rescheduling something, signing up for a call. Let's just move to do that. Before you leave, come back to the room. Maybe we'll have lunch here for you, and we can move ahead with that.
So who's going to join us? Staff?
Yeah, Ed is coming.